Hi, it's Alexander Russo with The Grade, and this is the Education Show. I am so happy to be here with Alisha Searcy to hear about her new organization and to talk about all things Democrats and education. Alisha, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I know just a little bit about you from the New York Times and Chalkbeat. Congratulations.
Thank
Um,
you.
but folks who don't know you or about you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me. I'm Alicia Thomas Searcy. I am the founder, co founder, I should say, of the Center for Strong Public Schools and the Center for Strong Public Schools Action Fund. And of course, we're going to talk a lot more about those two brand new organizations that launched this week. Very excited about that. In my past life, I'm a former state legislator. I spent 12 years in the Georgia House of Representatives and spent most of that time working on education transformation issues. I've also been a superintendent, ran a network of all girls public charter schools in the metro Atlanta area. In my spare time, I do a little bit of media, a little TV show here in Atlanta where I live. And I'm a mom of three school age children. Well, I should say two, because one is heading to college next week. And I'm also a wife. I'm married to a retired state trooper, and we live in Georgia. And that's me.
Excellent. Congratulations on all those things. That's a great list of accomplishments. Before we get started, I like to ask people silly questions and share my own silly thoughts on the topic. I wanted to see if I could ask you, first of all, what you were like in school as a kid. I was a I was a theater kid trying to pretend to be a jock. What were
Oh.
you like in school?
I was a theater kid, believe it or not.
A real one.
Yeah, a real one. Middle and high school, I went to performing arts schools. So I literally was a theater kid. I went for acting and musical theater. So theater for middle school, musical theater for high school. And I was pretty decent in terms of grades. Had a nice little social life. Uh, could have gone on the wrong track around middle school, but my mom kind of got me together, put me in a few really important programs like the NAACP Youth Council and things like that, and it really set me on a very interesting path. And so, ironically, when people see me from middle school or high school, they are not at all surprised about the path that I ended up taking.
Amazing. We should have a little sub chapter of education people who were theater kids.
Yes.
Maybe there's a few more of us. The other question I like to ask folks is to name a TV show or a movie or a Broadway show or a song that has a teacher or a school setting. My favorite these days is the incompetent former policeman who becomes a teacher in Baltimore in The Wire, Mr. P. Who's
Oh.
your favorite, or a favorite or memorable fictional educator?
Ooh, fictional educator. The first thing that comes to mind is Abbott Elementary.
Okay.
And
Who are you gonna pick?
ooh, that's a tough one though, and of course, I'm not even gonna remember the names right now, but, I have to say the older teacher, that's been around for a long time is probably my favorite. But I just in general, I love the script of that show. Well, I don't necessarily agree with all the things that they say about charter schools.
Right.
Um, I think it's super funny, and they really, capture what it's like to be in a traditional public school with a number of the challenges that it faces and opportunities for that matter.
Got it. The other show you might check out, if you haven't already, is called English Teacher. It's on Hulu or FX. I get the 2
Ooh,
mixed up.
okay.
But that's sort of a show that, it laughs both ways in a way that Abbott Elementary doesn't always laugh both ways, but Abbott is a great show, so
I'll have to check that out, thank you.
excellent. Okay, so you launched this new organization just this week. You've got coverage in the New York Times and Chalkbeats. I saw a press release this morning that there are all sorts of legislators and advocates and important people saying great things about it. Can you tell us the origin story behind this organization, where it came from, why it's needed, and then we'll get to what it's going to do. But where's this from? Where's this come from?
Um,
Whose idea was this?
well, my idea, and the idea of my co-founder, Gary Jones, who works in Texas, and we met at, Democrats for Education Reform, where we both worked, he for 3 years, I worked there for a year. But I'll tell you the impetus for this. When I was in the legislature, I served for 12 years, I mentioned, and worked on education. I don't like using the word reform because that's been a whole thing lately. But education transformation,
Okay.
I felt alone at times, being a Democrat in a Republican controlled legislature in particular, but also being a Democrat that supports issues like accountability, making sure that, there are choices within the public school system, talking about teacher effectiveness and leader effectiveness. That was at times a very lonely place. Not only because there weren't a lot of Democrats who were doing the work, but also because there wasn't a place for me to go to find good policy, at least organizations that were aligned with my values as a Democrat. And then politically, when it was time for me to run for reelection, I had a couple of folks that weren't pleased about some of my work and wanted to, primary me or, work against me. And so that was a very difficult time for me politically and, when you talk about the legislative work that I was doing, although very successful and got some very important things done, and I'm happy to share, some of that legislation that I'm very proud of and has created an opportunity for thousands of kids to have access to schools. I also knew then that at some point in my life, I wanted to be able to create organizations that would do for them what was not done for me. Do for them, meaning elected officials. And so in our 501(c)(3), which is the Center for Strong Public Schools, we are a policy think tank. We are the place, we call ourselves the home where left elected officials can come, get policy support, be surrounded by other Democrats who are deeply passionate about transforming education, reimagining public education, who also support public school choice, who also want to work on these issues. So we'll have a number of convenings. We'll have opportunities for thought leadership. So we'll bring in other people, smart people like yourself, to help talk about the most pressing issues in public education. And then on the C4, the political side, we've got the Action Fund. And that gives us an opportunity to support candidates, right? To write contribution checks to their campaigns to help them get reelected or for new candidates, to be able to do independent expenditures, but also be able to do lobbying and really push for the policies that we want to see. And so it's a tremendous opportunity for us to be able to serve elected officials who are doing this hard work, also be thought leaders in this space in terms of education transformation. And
Okay.
I would say drive, the agenda in terms of what Democrats need to be talking about when it comes to education.
Okay. We There's no way around it. We need to talk about DEFR, right? I have followed DEFR for years. I wrote a case study about the sort of rise and fall of DEFR probably 10 years ago now. Some of
Mm.
them still haven't forgiven me, though I hope they will. Why not do what you have just described through DEFR? And when did you realize that that wasn't going to work?
Well, a couple of things about that. I think everyone knows by now that DeFer has taken a different turn, that they have now, under the leadership of Jorge Lorsa, have decided that they're going to embrace vouchers and ESAs. I am a product of public education. I believe, as a matter of public policy, that we have to focus on the 80 and 90% of kids who will be in our public schools, and they need to work for them. And so, working for a national organization that has taken such a uh, pretty big turn in terms of the values of Democrats and what we believe in, was not a place that I felt at home, that I could continue to do my work. While I support public school choice, it's not the only thing that I do. And I want to make sure that we're, again, talking about accountability and we're talking about safe schools. And how do we support teachers to make sure that classrooms can work, right? And how do we talk about the science of reading?
And
And if I have to spend all of my time defending, it's not going to allow me to focus on what it takes to strengthen our public schools. So
hold
that
on.
was a huge piece of it.
And hold on just a second there, because I can't help but be curious, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. Um, was there a discussion that you were involved with before DEFR put out the manifesto? I think they're calling it, that said, "Hey, we need to talk about private school choice." Was there a moment where you thought about trying to influence them, since they're an existing organization a lot of people are familiar with? Can you take us backstage theater kid to theater kid, and describe a little bit of what it was like, or what was attempted, or was there no conversation and it was just, I'll see you around.
I think it was a little bit of both, and I can only speak to my experience.
Right.
I was brought in just a year ago at DFER to create the Southern Regional Office because DFER had not had a presence in the South. And I was certainly given my background. I've done, this work in the education space for more than 15 years. And so I think that role in the movement was respected. And so, yes, I was told, and it was shared with me early in this year that that was the position that the organization was going to take. And of course, I expressed my very deep concern and talked about my own personal experiences, Alex, of being a Democrat elected in the legislature and just supporting public school choice and how difficult that was. And so to be a Democrat and supporting private school choice was like the death nail, essentially. And so, yes, I tried to explain this because I've got the experience. I have the scars from, again, just doing public school choice. And so I knew, in terms of the work that I wanted to do, I knew the work that I think DFER has been doing for the last 10 to 15 years was going to be deeply harmed as a result of this position. But I wasn't the CEO,
Right.
and that wasn't my final decision to make. And I think it's probably evident from the number of people who have moved on from the organization that it's not something that a lot of us embrace. And so I'll just say that I can't speak for Jorge. I think, he believes in this very strongly and he's, has the right to believe what he wants. I think he has the right to do the work that he's doing. I think there's going to be a small group of Democrats that will actually embrace this as well. But I think it leaves for us this lane to do the work that needs to be done at the state level with center left Democrats to make sure that we are transforming public education.
And tell me a little bit more. I understand the Jorge's argument, not from him. I've tried to interview him, but I haven't been able to yet. But I understand the idea that the manifesto espouses. It's a little bit of a mirror of what Democrats in general are trying to figure out. The world has gone right, for legitimate reasons or otherwise. Parents, educators, there's a ton of Biden then Trump voting that happened in 2024. And the question is, where should Democrats go? I understand, but I want to understand it sounds like, based on your experience in the real world, it sounds like there's a danger for Democrats in saying, hey, let's at least make sure private school choice has accountability, et cetera. What's the what's the danger for going that way?
I think it takes the eye off the ball. I think there is a place for groups, individuals who will add to the conversation about the accountability that needs to be in these voucher and ESA programs. That's certainly not a lane that we will play in as Center for Strong Public Schools. Maybe it's something that DFER will do. I'm not really sure. But I will just say that I think when it comes to Democrats and our values, we believe in public education. We believe in its transformative power, right? We believe that education is the great equalizer. And so I think anything that takes us away from that, if you start talking about what's happening in private schools, resources going to private schools, it's not addressing the fact that, less than 40% of our students, fourth and eighth grade, are reading proficiently in this country, and even less so in the South. And so that's what's most important. I'm sure when you're able to talk to Jorge, he can explain it to you a little bit more in terms of how they've taken that position. But I have to tell you that I think there's an opportunity, as you alluded to a few minutes ago. We're in a very strange time, right? We've got at the federal government this concerted effort to dismantle not just the Department of Education, but it feels like public education, period.
Right.
And I think now is the time more than ever, regardless of the name of the organization, for Democrats to lead the way when we talk about protecting public education, protecting a student's right to a public education, and just ensuring that it works for all of our kids. And so we just can't be distracted right now because the stakes are just too high.
And what do you say to parents who are so demoralized, and concerned about public schools, some of whom are using private school choice already. How do you tell them, "Hey, I'm okay with public school choice, um, and I'm okay with if you're a traditional Democrat, I'm okay with choice in all sorts of other settings, but I can't have you go or I can't support you sending your kid to a local parochial school or a local classical school or some other kind of school." How do you have that conversation with voters as who may be like not sure where to go?
I'm a mom first. And so while I've been a legislator, I'm doing this work as CEO of the center. I'm a mom first. And so I wouldn't dare tell a parent that they should not exercise every single option that's available to them, whether it's in the private or the public sector.
Mhm.
Um, we only get one shot to educate our kids. I've got 2 little ones now. The first one is leaving for college, but my bonus kids are small. And as parents, my husband and I are navigating this every day. And so I wouldn't dare say to a parent, "No, this isn't for you," particularly when there are parents who are middle and higher income who have had these options all along. I think what I say next after you have the right to choose what's best for your kids, I also say it's why we've gotta operate with a sense of urgency to fix what is happening in some of our public schools that is demoralizing parents. I think that there are a lot of schools actually that are working well for our kids within the traditional system and certainly with public charter schools, magnets. There are a number of schools that are actually working. We don't know enough about them. We're not, um, you know, trying to copy the things that they're doing, and so we need to do more of that, and we've gotta fix the structural problems that exist with public education. I'm not gonna sit and tell a parent, "Keep your kid in a school that's not working." I wouldn't do it, and I wouldn't expect you to do it either.
I got a couple questions I want to ask that are about sort of larger, broader issues, and then I want to come back and wrap up with what's next for you in the center in terms of timeline and candidates and endorsements and things like that. One question I wanted to ask was, I interviewed a guy named Stephen Wilson not too long ago who wrote a book about charter schools and the demise of some high expectations charter schools. And I'm going to paraphrase what he has to say in the book, but the gist of what I got was that um, uh, well-intended but misguided social justice efforts um, disrupted some very, very high-performing school systems, charter school networks. He's a charter school guy, I'm sure you know. Um, and I've oversimplified his thesis, but he in his book tells a story about a lot of people, including himself, who were pushed out, and a lot of charter school networks that are less tough, racist, I'm not sure what term to use, than they used to be. Um, do you have any thoughts on the seeming demise of some of these high accountability charter networks?
It's a great question that I'm thinking about a lot. And when I talk about the work that we're doing at the center, one of the conversations I actually want to have is with Mr. Wilson and a few others. I haven't invited him yet, but I plan to. So if you're watching this, sir, you are invited.
He's
But I
great.
want to bring together Mr. Wilson and folks from the National Charter School Alliance, and other organizations to have this conversation because I think it's really important. I think what he's hit on, I've not read his book. It is literally sitting behind me. And it's one of the things I plan to read when I head to South Africa in a couple of weeks. But I think he's getting to a larger question, which is what's happening with charter schools in general. We're seeing where in some places the performance is not where it used to be. They used to be outperforming districts. That's not happening at the same level in some places. I would argue that it has very little to do with the quote unquote social justice movement. I think, and again, I haven't read the book yet, but from my anecdotal experience and having led charter schools myself, I know that it was not necessary for me to have, kids walking in a line silently when they're in the hallways in order for them to have access to a high quality education. And so no disrespect to the models that existed that way, but I will tell you, I walked in some charter schools around the country and found myself troubled by some of the discipline practices that were in the schools that I'm glad are gone. And I don't think we have to do that to children in order to get their attention and make sure that they learn. Were there some practices likely that went too far in the name of social justice or in the name of equity? That's possible. I can think of a few school districts, not charters, who probably went a little far. So I think there's some conversation that needs to happen there. But what we cannot forget is that all of our schools, maybe even private schools, but certainly public schools, have all been dealing with the same thing, right? Chronic absenteeism, dealing with teacher quality issues, dealing with this revolving door of teachers. I mean, there's a number of issues that all of our schools are facing, and I think charters are no different. I think, as I've said a few weeks ago on a panel that I was on for Atlanta Public Schools, as they were talking about some of the charters who aren't performing, and someone in the audience said, actually on the panel, said, "Well, we need to close those schools." And I said, you know, 5, 10 years ago, I might have agreed with that because that was the mindset. They're not performing, just close them. But if we remember that these are public schools, these are all of our children, regardless of the type of school they go to, what we ought to be asking is, what have we done to support these schools? What have we done to make sure that the leaders have access to the resources that they need? So when you can say that you've done the things you needed to do to support the schools, then we can have a conversation about closing them. And so it just raises a lot of questions and a lot of dialogue that I think we need to have. But I believe very strongly in the power of public charter schools and innovation, having high accountability, and making sure that parents have options in the public school system.
Excellent. The other question I wanted to ask you that's in the category of big picture is, I come from journalism. I worked in the US Senate for a bunch of years, and then I went to journalism. And I always ask people what their experience is of reading media coverage or being covered. And
Hmm.
I can't help but think that you might have some interesting and helpful things to say to education reporters and editors who want to do a good job, who maybe don't understand politics the way that you do or the way that I used to. What's your experience been with media coverage? Has it been overall a help, a hindrance, a crapshoot? Are there things that you would want education journalists to know and maybe think about doing differently?
Ooh, that's really good. Um, as I think about it, I mean, I think about just the covers that we have received this week with our launch, which has been amazing. I don't think I've been quoted in the New York Times before, so that was pretty cool, right?
Yes, right.
But I will say that while I wanted the story to be about our launch, naturally reporters tend to want to talk about DEFR, right? And the changes there and all of that, because that sells readers, right? And I understand that even if you're talking about education, it's still the media. There's still a headline to grab. And so I will tell you that's been a challenge for us, not just in our work in this organization because we're a week old according to the world, but I've been doing this a long time. And so I think what is challenging is balancing how do you get the real story on education that's probably not as sexy, right? I live and breathe education. You live and breathe education. We understand this. I could talk about it all day, but the average reader, the average parent, maybe, they may not be as interested. And so I'm sure that reporters have a challenge of figuring out how do I tell the story and make this sexy. And so I can appreciate that experience. So I think the advice, if I could give any, is to help us tell the story about education, what's working. I think that's really important. I think perhaps there's a lot of demoralized or parents who are frustrated about education because we don't tell enough about the good stories, the good things that are happening in public education. And maybe it's not going to sell. Maybe it's not the story with the biggest headline, but I think it's so important to make sure that voters and readers and people understand how important education is.
Mhm.
Those topics that I've mentioned a few times. That those are the things that matter in education. The last thing that I'll say is that there's so much power in the media,
Yeah.
and one of my wishes is when you ask voters, like, what are your top issues? Yes, the economy is important and healthcare is important, but I want to see education be number one, at
Mhm.
least number two or three on that list. And I think the media has a very critical role in helping to drive that narrative.
What's the I love what you're saying about the tendency of journalism towards conflict and negativity, frankly. What's
Mhm.
the what's the not non-negative? What's the alternative frame for the launch of the center? Cool new center starts a new home for center left candidates? What's the what's the what's the what's the alternative way of thinking about it or talking about it?
I love that. I would say finally there's a voice for the center left to lead on education. That's what the story is. We don't have that. I'm a Democrat. I've been elected. I'm in the party. I'm part of the state committee here in Georgia. We're struggling as a party, right? If you look at the polls, it shows that as a party, Democrats are struggling.
Mhm.
And it's for a number of reasons that we won't talk about today. But the question is, who can lead on education? I think it's Democrats. And so the story now is who's going to stop, who's going to fight, who's going to stand up when it comes to the things that are happening federally that Donald Trump is trying to do. Who's been the voice previously? I think there's no better time than now for an organization like the Center for Strong Public Schools and our Action Fund
Mhm.
to be that voice for the center left.
Okay, got it. The, I know it's gonna come up at some point. I know you're gonna decline to answer this, but I've gotta ask. Um, your funders, your supporters, the C4, if I understand the law correctly, you don't ever have to disclose those, but the C3, eventually, at least, someone will look up a 990 and see who's on the list. What's the plan for telling us, who's behind you? And also, what's your fundraising goal? You've already raised commitments of, I think, $1 million. What's your fundraising goal and what's your disclosure plan?
You're right. I won't be able to give you a lot of details. Right now, the money that I have raised as CEO is all C4 money.
Okay.
And so, as you said, it's not required by law to disclose C4 donors, and that's not just a Center for Strong Public Schools thing. That's a federal law. Not that we're not allowed to, but those who donate to C4s are not required and want to remain anonymous in our case. And so, what I can tell you about that is that there are folks who believe very strongly in public education and protecting that institution and transforming it. And so we're doing that work and we're making sure that we get folks elected who believe in that as well and who are aligned with our values. But when we have some C3 donors, I look forward to sharing those. And my goal is to make sure that we are raising money both nationally and locally. So we're working in Georgia, we're working in Texas, Alabama, and Tennessee. And so we've got some proposals out, conversations that are going. And I look forward to sharing that. I believe in transparency, I believe in sharing information, and I'm proud to have the support that we have both on the C4 and the C3 side.
Excellent. Speaking of candidates and what happens next, let's wrap up by peeking into the future. Are you going to endorse candidates? Are you going to try to get blue state governors not to take the choice money? What's the next time that you all will be doing something public?
Sure. Well, we're definitely going to be involved in the Georgia Democratic primary for governor and state school superintendent. I live in Georgia. It's my primary state that I focus on in my national work. And of course, Gary is in Texas, and we've got the other states that we're working in. But
Yeah.
when we look at the numbers, Georgia and Texas have a lot of opportunity. And so we plan to spend between our 2 states, probably close to 1.5 million on, those races. And so in Georgia, I'm very excited. We've had another candidate join the race just today, to run for governor, and so that makes 5 candidates, very strong people, and frankly, we will plan to endorse. It just matters who the champion is that will emerge from this field. Um we're looking for the candidate who wants to be the education governor,
Right.
who is aligned again with those issues that I talked about, who believes that we've got to reimagine public education. And so I'm excited about that. And we're also going to be investing in legislative races. And so we have some who are champions already who demonstrated that they are in support of our policy agenda. We want to make sure they stay in office. And we also want to make sure that we send the message when you make these bold decisions on behalf of kids, we're gonna have your back. And so we wanna make sure that we spend the resources both in hard money, that means the direct contributions, as well as soft money, so some independent expenditures. Because again, we want Democrats to know when you stand up for kids, we will have your back. And so that's what you can look forward to in the 26th election, both in Georgia and in Texas. We'll have some legislative spending as well in Alabama and in Tennessee. And we'll look forward to getting more Democrats elected and folks involved in our network who we can continue to support.
This has been so interesting talking to you about this. I want to thank you so much, Alicia Thomas Searcy, for showing up and telling us about this fascinating new organization. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. My absolute pleasure. And if I could, I would love for folks to follow us. Our websites are strongschoolsaction.org and strongschoolsnow.org. And all of our social media channels are Strong Schools Action. So make sure you follow us. We would love to have your support and nominate elected officials that you think should be in our network.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.